Hello, my fellow WarThunder prisoners of war. Today I'd like to talk about the M6A2E1, otherwise known as the lengthy M6. Admittedly, I have a love-hate relationship with this tank, as I like it a lot. However, the tank has a lot of shortcomings, and I'd like to address them and the tank's general production, or how it came to be. So what is the lengthy, towering tank that sits taller than an American T-29? Well, it's just that. An M6 with a T-29 turret, essentially. Following the invasion of Europe by the Allies in 1944, it was considered that the Allies would have to have a more heavily armored and more well-armed tank to push through fortifications that Americans had assumed would be a problem in the invasion of northwestern Europe. The M6A2E1 was designed in this capacity as a stopgap, a heavily armored breakthrough tank that would be able to fight enemy fortifications. However, it was not supposed to be a permanent fixture for Americans' heavy tank design at the time. And as it stood with the advancing Allied armies, the M26 Pershing had not been produced in substantial numbers, and the T-29 project had yet to be finished in the time that it would take for the advance to happen. We would advance sooner than the T-29's projected finish date. Thus, what does America do? Make another stopgap measure, as America always does. After the trials of the original M6 was not adopted into service, the U.S. Army Ordnance Corps decided that they would mount a T-29 turret onto an M6 chassis and up-armor the chassis. The M6 was designed for mounting a 76mm cannon, however, so the turret ring of the M6's chassis would have to be modified substantially and expanded to meet this endeavor into a stopgap tank. To increase the armor of the tank, it was decided to remove the driver's vision door along with the hull machine guns and then weld an additional armor plate onto the chassis at an angle. This increased the front plate of the M6 to an effective thickness of 7.5 inches in freedom units, or 190.5 millimeters for my European friends out there. In August of 1944, a total of 15 T1E1s, a variant of the M6 with an electrical transmission instead of a torque converter, a total of 20 T1E1s remained with the Ordnance Corps at this time. It was decided that 15 would be converted for trials and 5 would remain left over for spare parts. It was projected that the tank would be ready by mid-November of 44. Originally, the Army's ground forces liked the idea of a more heavily armored tank with a much larger cannon. However, it was not to be, as General Eisenhower deemed it to be, impractical for use, which in the end killed the project overall as soon as Ike got wind of it. As much as I dislike Ike as a general, this would turn out to be the best decision possible for the A2E1, as it weighed in at nearly 77 tons with its combat load. It showed poor maneuverability, lacking ability to climb a slope at 22 degrees inclination. Given that there would not be enough time to change the drive gear reduction before sending the tank to the European theater, this tank would be of functional questionability, more akin to something like the German Tiger I, heavily armored for the time with a large cannon, however ineffective in maintenance. As a maintainer in the Air Force, I will say that I still prefer working on an F-15 or an F-16 over an F-22 or an F-35 due to the ease of maintenance on the F-16. This would have been a huge issue in the rough and muddy terrain in northwestern Europe, especially for logistics and maintainers at the time. Despite its shortcomings, the E2 was put into production for 2 tanks to act as a test bed for the T-29's turret and armament. 2 turrets were modified and mounted on a T1E1 chassis at the Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland. The plans to up-armor the T1E1s never made it into fruition. Pictures shown here is the M6A2E1 in 1945, showing the muzzle brake that was later added to the T5 cannon. During its time as a test bed, the A2 went through many modifications as the turret for the T-29 had not been entirely decided. That's why you see differences in the turret mounted on the T1E1 versus the later T-29 concept. In addition to the T-29 turret, the main armament of the A2 was the T5E1 105 105mm gun. The initial gun was based on the T4 105mm anti-air gun, but had reduced barrel length and fired a one-piece ammunition. However, this ammunition was long and the gun would need to be depressed to allow for loading of shells. The initial T5's gun barrel was smaller as a result. This was changed to the T5E1 gun, firing two-piece ammunition. Additionally, it was decided to lengthen the barrel to the same length as the T4 105mm anti-air gun. During trials, the tank fired the T32E1 APC-BC round and the T29E3 HVAP round, as well as the T30E1 HE round. While these are the only known shells tested with the gun, it could have fired any round for the T5E1 105mm cannon, such as the T13 APC-BC round and the T37 APC-BC round, which you see in-game. The A2 would have had a 5-man crew. Due to the size of the rounds, there would need to be 2 loaders, a gunner, a commander, and the driver. However, the M6A2E1 was still a very cramped tank for its design. So that's the history lesson over for the tank. How does this tank perform in WarThunder? Unfortunately, a lot of the real-world shortcomings of this tank come to light in its in-game design. It has poor maneuverability, poor neutral steering, and it makes this heavy tank in maneuverability only. This tank is only a heavy tank in maneuverability. While there is the odd occurrence of surviving a lot of shots, this tank can easily be one-shot through the front due to the original M6's design of having flat viewports on the side for drivers. It is nearly impossible to angle this tank in any meaningful way. The sloping of the frontal armor is not great, as it cannot take direct rounds to its plate. From something like a T44-100 or a Tiger II, it will punch straight through your frontal plate. So why do I like this tank? If it is a heavy tank that has the survivability of a lesser medium tank, one of this tank's worst weaknesses is also one of its strengths: the height of the tank itself. This tank is effectively used as a sniper position tank due to the high velocity of the round, the size of the round, and its penetrative values. This tank can pen most things frontally, including the Tiger II, T-44s, IS variant tanks. The only thing that it's not going to pen easily is something like a YAG Tiger. The height, coupled with the fact that it has a negative 10 degrees gun depression, allows this tank to survivably engage tanks in positions that most tanks cannot engage due to the height. The fact that the turret mantlet is decently armored against most things outside of heat. Most things won't go through your turret, so your best position is a hull down position and or a position where you can obscure and or cover your frontal plate. The next great thing about this tank is something I've already mentioned. It's its cannon. This is the T29 cannon at 6.7. In even tiers or down tiers, this tank is a monster. Even in up tiers at 7.3 and 7.7, this tank performs pretty well, especially against IS players that don't know how to play their vehicle whatsoever. And the fact that it can fire the T13 capped round makes it even better, because almost anything that you hit through a turret will one-shot that tank, or at least completely disable that tank crew. I loved to play the T29 when it was at 6.7. Admittedly, it was a little unfair to Tiger II players to face it. However, that was what the T29 was designed to do, to fight heavily armored German tanks and push through heavily armored fortifications. So my overall rating for this tank to play in its own tier and in a down tier is a 7 out of 10. It has a learning curve because it is hard to get out of the mindset of playing like a heavy tank and angling. But once you do, and you play a little more sparingly and you play a little more safe, you can easily average 4 to 5 kills a match. If you've made it to the end of the video, give yourself a pat on the back, because you're a beautiful person, and thank you for spending the time out of your day with me. There's a lot of negativity in our community and social life in general as a whole. As someone who has been dealing with military life and negativity and navigating what it's like to be a civilian again for a while, I want to remind you, if you served with someone and have not checked in on them for a while, please check in on them. As someone who has been dealing with coming to terms with my 4-year relationship falling apart and ending while I was away, sometimes you need to talk. If you're having issues, be a man or a woman and talk to someone, especially if you're one of us prideful men out there. Make sure you get it out and vent. And that doesn't just go for the service members. If you're struggling with something, find someone to talk to, whether it be a professional or a friend. We are all human, and we all have our battles and demons to face and deal with. But my brothers and sisters, it's hard to do something alone, so reach out. I have a Discord linked in the comments below. If you need anything, if nothing else, you're welcome to come talk to me. Right, the TED Talk's over. If you have a tank or plane you'd like me to cover, please comment below and I'll try to get a review out on it. If you're new here, please comment and subscribe as it helps with the algorithm. I hope you have a glorious day, and I'll see you in the next one.